Hi, everyone, and welcome to Talks at Google. I'm Mike Coglianese. Today, I'm excited to welcome Micah Rajunov to talk about their new book, Nonbinary, Memoirs of Gender and Identity. For nearly a decade, Micah has hosted the website genderqueer.me, a community-based resource for transgender health, and a platform on which Micah has shared their engaging story about transitioning to become non-binary. Micah has presented numerous talks, workshops, and published articles on transgender health, educating peers, parents, and providers about the diversity of gender identity. The book, which Micah co-edited with Scott Duane, was recognized as a finalist for the 2020 Lambda Literary Awards for Best LGBTQ Anthology. Micah is currently pursuing a PhD at Boston University, studying how digital technology impacts professions. Micah, welcome.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me here.
Hey, how you doing today?
Really good.
Great. And thanks everyone for joining. I want to let everyone know we will be taking audience questions in the second half of the talk, so please do add those to the live chat throughout and we'll get to them. So Micah, before we get to the book, I wanted to start by helping people to get to know you better. So on your website, you talk about your personal journey, and from reading the comments, it's obvious to see how your story is connected with so many people. So I was hoping you could start by talking a little bit about yourself and how you became involved in transgender advocacy.
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually started 10 years ago. It's a long time. And I didn't really know what transgender was or meant. And when I learned about it, the kind of explanation that I got was, you want to go from one gender to another. And so I was like, oh, I'm not transgender. End of story. Obviously not the end. And then something kept, drawing me into this world, and I kept exploring. I went to a conference, I met some people, and eventually I found out, you can be trans and not have to be like a binary gender, man or woman, male or female. And I was like, oh, that's me. And so I didn't know what that meant really, but I knew that I wanted to have surgery, top surgery. I always say I transitioned backwards because I started with surgery and then did everything else. But that was just very clear in my mind. And so when I was doing research online, I didn't really see myself represented. So there were listservs and forums and blogs, and I would just read about all these people and how they did it and why they did it and their journey. And I was like, that's great. It's kind of close, but not really me. Can you get surgery if you don't identify as a man? Like, that was a big question. And I didn't really know the answer, but I was going to do it. So when that started, I decided to start a blog just to document my surgery process. And I was like, well, if anyone else, will find this and it'll help them, that'll be great. And that kind of snowballed into today, 10 years later. I guess there was a lot more to process than just surgery. So I started kind of just exploring my identity through my blog, and people really responded. And I would get so many emails a week being like, I had never heard about this. I really see myself, or I'm different, but it speaks to me in a way that other trans narratives don't speak to me. I was kind of questioning, what does it mean to be non-binary? What's my gender? What does it mean to exist in this world where your gender doesn't exist? And then I just started, again, I would go to a trans conference and not see myself represented. There would be talks and sessions and workshops, and I'm like, but where's my workshop? So I was like, if nobody's doing it, I guess I got to do it. So I started giving talks and workshops, and apparently that also resonated with people. And then I just kept kind of writing, got invited to consult, and started writing a book, and here we are. So that's the short version of it. It's 10 years.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's really, really easy to see the connection that you've made with people on your website. And, getting to that question of gender, I wanted to turn to the book now. And in it, you write, and I'm quoting, "Gender is everywhere. It permeates everything we do, everyone we meet, every place we visit, every interaction we have. And so, you were talking about gender, and given that gender shapes our lives in so many ways, you pose the question right at the start of the book, and it runs through so many of the stories. And the question is, what is gender? What's your take on this question, and how does the book reveal the many facets of gender?
I think my take on this question, and I don't know if I say this in the book, but if I usually say it in my workshops, if you come here with questions and you leave with more questions, then I did my job. Because I don't think there's a simple answer to what is gender. And I think what we understand of gender is we have our biology, and that's kind of what we're taught. There's males and females, and it's a binary, rigid system that's kind of predetermined by your genes or your physical appearance. And obviously that's not the case. Even biology is a whole spectrum. And then you have kind of your expression and how you look. And again, that's obviously we have a lot of flexibility in how we show our gender, how we feel our gender. And then there's like our identity, which is very inexplainable and kind of ineffable sense of who you are. And for some people, it's very clear, and for others, it's not very clear. But I think most cisgender or non-transgender people don't really ever question that of themselves. And so I think one big kind of message that I wanted to impart with my book is that everybody has a gender, so it's not just about, people who are wondering what it means to be non-binary. This is really like a universal question that most people don't get to ask themselves, and they really should, because gender is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really struck me from both the book and your website is that this concept of a spectrum of gender and the different facets of gender, like you said, identity and expression biology, it's really like an aha moment for people who ultimately identify as non-binary, and opening up a whole new world for them. And, what's your perspective on that from the folks you've gotten to know?
I mean, I think for me, it was a big aha moment when they're like, no, you don't have to, transition from a woman to a man. You can just, be something different. And everybody has their different aha moment. But what's interesting to me is when I give workshops at conferences and people will come up to me, and sometimes it's like parents of trans kids who are cisgender, they've probably never questioned gender, and they'll come up and they'll say, wow, like I just had this aha moment about my own gender and what that means, and maybe as a kid, I was like this rough and tumble girl and that wasn't okay. And now I realize like that was just a different part of gender. So it's really like, it's just not even like a pole or a spectrum. It's kind of like this web, like people describe it in so many different ways. And I think the aha moments are just very personal, kind of for you, that you have this feeling that something feels right all of a sudden and something clicks. And having one doesn't mean you solved everything, because there's many parts to it, obviously. But I think what I want is for people to experience those moments in themselves.
Yeah, that was something I found really interesting and insightful from the book, the fact that you bring together 30 different people's stories, and it lets you see all those different perspectives and facets, because it's not the same experience for everybody.
Right. And in each of those stories, like some people have it totally figured out and they're like, I've been like this, for many, many years. And others are kind of in that process. And even while we were doing the book, some people had to it took 6 years to do the book. So some people's gender kind of changed along the way, and they were like, can I update my story? I have new things to tell. And so it was a very valuable process even for them. And obviously very individualized too.
And different ages too, people growing up at different times when, the environment was different and where the community was at that point was different.
Right. and just different ways of exploring them. So some people found it through sexuality, others through like a community, others through a website, others at school, especially now. So yeah, it's just kind of an infinite universe.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we get into some of the stories in the book. One of the stories in the book was from Melissa, and Melissa describes their genderqueer backpack that includes all the things that Melissa picked up over the years. And I thought that was a great metaphor to think on how to think about the gender spectrum, because like you were saying earlier, regardless of how we identify, we all pick up different behaviors and styles and interests that define who we are.
Yeah, I really like this piece. Is one of our kind of first submissions, and it's very simple, but also very kind of captures the metaphor of gender as a backpack, and you get to decide what you put in and what you don't. And some things you kind of realize you're carrying unnecessarily, and other things are kind of by choice. And so here in the story, Melissa tells about the various objects they pick up as a woman and objects that they've discarded or kept, and then objects that represent manhood or malehood or masculinity. And then there's a third section of objects that just are kind of these genderqueer objects that represent this queering, this like individualizing, empowering, owning their own gender.
Yeah, I thought that was a great story. Another thing that came up a lot throughout the book was language. So I wanted to talk with you about that a little bit, because language seems like, it could be a major barrier for this concept of a gender spectrum. Just thinking about some languages where every noun has a gender with it, or Levi says in their story that names are loaded with connotations.
Right. And I think the difference with like a backpack metaphor is you're carrying your own backpack. And we forget that gender is, you have a gender, but it's also shaped by society and it's reflected to society. And so the relationships around you shape your gender. I mean, you're born and you're assigned a gender, not by your own, willingness. And language is one of those that very powerfully shapes gender, like even how we talk about it, right? Male, female, masculine, feminine. We've tried to come up with words that capture this differentness about it. But so let me nerd out here for a second. There's some really interesting research in psychology about different languages, because some of languages are obviously gendered in terms of like the pronouns and how you speak about yourself. And so my first language is Spanish, which was a big hurdle when I was kind of figuring out pronouns, because I had to gender myself all the time. And this research says that the language that you learn shapes how you see and associate different objects. So like in Spanish, key is feminine, but in German, it's masculine. And so people associate keys with very different attributes based on the language that they grew up in. And so this is kind of this weird way of intersection of language and gender and kind of what we think of things. Now imagine what happens with people. So yeah, and language is something that the non-binary community has been kind of struggling with, but also playing with. Because language is evolving and changing, and we get to shape it as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting research. Getting into how it, it's yourself. It's how it's affecting a person, not just an object. And I wonder if that's gotten into language and how non-binary people reflect if you're from that country, just about like the influences in the environment.
Yeah, and obviously it's, there's a lot of cultural aspects about gender. There's some cultures that have specific words for people who have historically expressed a non-binary gender. And so we're trying to kind of find the word for what it means to be me. And I use non-binary for myself, but some people don't. Some people feel transgender is a good kind of label for them. Others really don't think that fits them. Even the title for the book was a big discussion point, because it was like, do we want to call it genderqueer? But is that too much like of a current term? Does it have political connotations? Non-binary, it's kind of like awkward. Like, what do we even call this thing? And even within the community, there's a lot of discussion and debate about, what word do we use to represent ourselves?
Right. Because that's the term that you've landed on to describe yourself as non-binary. And you do mention that there's a lot of different terms people have explored to describe themselves as well. I can see that in what you just said about languages and trying to evolve language really to describe your own identity. Right,
because there aren't any words really sometimes to say like, well, how do I say that I don't feel masculine and don't feel feminine? There's not, like, how can you describe your gender without saying masculine and feminine? And people are trying to find ways and are trying to communicate kind of what they feel inside. And I think a big part of being non-binary, at least for me it has been, is this notion of you have a gender that nobody can really truly understand because our society doesn't have the constructs and the frameworks for it. So how I present myself is a close approximation. But most people are trying to get there. And sometimes, like, if someone is gender fluid and one day they feel very, very masculine, one day they feel very feminine, one day they feel both, how do they express this in the world when some of it isn't even allowed? So it's also not just kind of your own private gender, but your public gender and others seeing your own gender, and recognizing that. And so that's a big part of I think, the struggle that non-binary people go through, is not just trying to define gender for yourself, but trying to define your gender for other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that, about visibility as well. It's one of the main sections of the book. And one statistic that you mentioned in the introduction really jumped out at me. When you said that amongst published articles about the transgender community, non-binary individuals are mentioned only 1.2% of the time amongst articles about the transgender community, yet non-binary individuals comprise about a third of the trans population, and that percentage is rising. So the fact it's rising seems to indicate that increased visibility is having an impact. And maybe you could tell me more about what that progression has been like and where we're at now.
Yeah, visibility is a double edge. So it's good in that, again, I didn't see myself represented because it doesn't mean there weren't non-binary people transitioning or getting surgery. It's just I couldn't find them. So they weren't visible to me. And I started a very public blog and became kind of a visible spokesperson. So in that sense, visibility is very good because it gives people a role model, examples, kind of something to grab onto. On the other hand, there's visibility when it's harmful, because in a lot of places it's not safe to express yourself in a different way. So this story, Hypervisible, in the book is about someone, and their blog is called The Bearded Genderqueer. And so it's about someone who sometimes enjoys wearing a beard and skirts, and they don't feel safe doing that. And so they feel like they need to be invisible, but that compromises who they are. So it's a give and take of like how do you express yourself in public, but at the same time, be true to yourself. And then the other issue with visibility is just representation within the community. And so right now, the stereotype of non-binary people or genderqueer people is kind of this white, thin, androgynous, I'm like, here we are. And there's not really like people of color, people of different body sizes, people with different gendered combinations and expressions. And so I think this diversity isn't really celebrated very much. And so someone can be like, oh yeah, I see myself in Micah, great. But I'm only one very small slice of who the non-binary community is. And that's something I really tried to bring to the book, is just this diversity of representations of gender, but also just life and kind of your approach to it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, getting to read all of those stories really brought that diversity, to the fore, and gave me a lot of different perspectives on what it is to be non-binary and to discover that. In terms of visibility and awareness, I noticed that you had retweeted when Merriam-Webster added the singular definition of they into their dictionary. And I'm just curious what something like that represents for you.
I think that kind of brings us full circle in that it's showing us how we are shaping language. So they becomes like an official pronoun. I know the APA and the Associated Press, a lot of news organizations have kind of updated their guidelines finally, like it's a big battle about how to refer to someone in a news story with they, them pronouns. And again, like it's a win. It means we're thinking about it outside of like our little niche community. Like it's in society. People are aware of it. Like your mother, your grandmother, they kind of have heard about this. Sometimes, random colleagues will send me articles. So it's there, and it gives people something to talk about as well, and kind of to hang on to when they're not very familiar with it. But on the other hand, like with pronouns specifically, it's they, them. Again, it makes you very visible. And so if I go into the world, very few people are probably going to spontaneously use they, them pronouns for me. What we try to do is ask for pronouns, but then I'm the only one in the room who uses they, them pronouns. And that's kind of awkward. And that sort of outs me, right? As maybe non-binary. And maybe I don't want to be outed as that. Maybe I don't want to make it about my gender. Maybe I'm at work. And so again, it's a back and forth. And there's no right answer, and it's about kind of what feels right for you, but also educating the world so that what feels right for you is okay in society, and it's not something that people even think about. Like it just becomes kind of the everyday thing. Well, yeah, I have friends who use all these different pronouns, and that's perfectly fine, and I don't give it a second thought. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we'll get there someday.
Yeah, and as you're, talking about language, really making a space for non-binary community and folks such as yourself to talk about themselves and kind of fit into the language of the culture. I want to talk with you about the community, and particularly the online community, because you mentioned in the book what a big impact that had in bringing people together in the non-binary community. So I was really looking forward to hearing about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think first when I say non-binary community, there isn't one community, right? And I don't represent it. It's kind of a lot of people who identify a lot of different ways. But I found community online. And I think a lot of non-binary people have found community online because it's not that it's a rare thing, but I think it's something that is, again, not always visible. It depends where you live. Are there people around? Like, I don't think I had ever met a non-binary person knowingly as a kid. So yeah, online, I started a blog, people commented, would email me a lot. And it was just my way of connecting with people and seeing myself. The other thing, there's kind of this trope that everyone starts their journey on YouTube because, we upload our videos and kind of talk about gender, and it's also a way to document the changes that we go through physically. And so there's quite a few very popular YouTube channels of people who just kind of documented their process and again made themselves visible and created this community.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting about the use of video, both as a way to, really tell people, obviously, much more visually about what's going on in your life, but on the other hand, also to raise visibility. And one of the stories in the book from Jamie about learning from YouTube about how people present themselves. So kind of going in both directions.
Yeah. And obviously I'm more of a writer, hence a written blog and a book. But I did do the typical YouTube videos of like, this is my voice on hormones, this is how it's changing. And you kind of have that progression. And I think some people, there's something very powerful about an image, but there's also something very powerful about a video and kind of a casual video, like in your bedroom. Like it makes it real, right? It's not just this person maybe far removed from me, maybe in a magazine, who knows? It's like this person is like me in their bedroom, and it just brings it to life, really. And it gives a way for people to see themselves kind of going through this as well.
Yeah, you can't deny the presence of a video. Everybody sees it, and everybody sees the same thing, and you have to, talk about it and learn from it, and compare and so forth. So, yeah, I think that's great. I wanted to ask you about social media. There's a question at Google that we ask ourselves periodically, which is, what's one thing that's going well, and what's one thing we can do better? So I was curious about social media, how well social media has provided spaces for the community to grow, and also how could it do better?
Oh, this is a good question. I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I'm sure many of you do too. It allowed me to connect with a lot of people all over the world, and also have a platform for educating people on non-binary gender and having myself visible so that other people could see themselves. And I've learned a lot from social media, like things that I probably would have never known to even Google, which is part of a problem, right? You can Google everything, but what do you even search for? There's things that you don't know exist, like non-binary gender. On the other hand, there's people can be very mean on social media. I'll just put it that way. And so when the more visible you are, you can get some pretty nasty things. And I think there's a story in the book by Jeffrey Marsh, who is a Vine star, and has also written a book. And they got a lot of hate online, like death threats. And it's just, I think people forget that there's a person at the other end. And maybe sometimes expressing your hate is not the kindest thing to do. Even if sometimes you mean well and like someone messed up, and there are ways of saying, hey, you messed up, you offended me, you can do better. And there are kind ways of doing that, I think. And I think we have to do better and find those ways.
Yeah, totally agree. The challenges of content moderation are, because there's always people out there who will be mean, and finding a way to still provide a great space for people to communicate and interact and come together.
And things get lost in translation, right? Mm-hmm. Like I've probably said some things which others have thought mean when maybe I was joking or I didn't know better. And so it's a very dangerous place to be. And at the same time, it's very fulfilling. And I have really just sometimes made friendships from social media. Like one of my best friends, he posted something about somebody doing research on trans health, and I tweeted at him, and then he was like, yeah, I'm going to be there. And then we met up in person, and then we ended up like writing this article that got published. So yeah, it's magical.
That just from reading your website and the articles you posted, it just really brings to light the value of comments and the comments that, people responding to your writing about your experience and about other featured voices that you have on your website. It was great reading those articles, but in a way it was even better to read the comments and just how people responded to that and, found those aha moments or just said like, wow, somebody's really talking about me now. To get that feedback,
And what I try to do with my blog is really make it a conversation, because it sometimes feels like it's, just me putting it out there. It's one way. And I tried to like ask questions. And then what I did at the end, I was, after a few years, I was I'm done with exploring myself. I'm good. Here I am world. And I still had this platform and I wanted to use it. And I started the Featured Voices series. And so I invited people to write guest articles for my blog, and I had different themes, like coming out, like significant others. And so I got a ton of people writing in. And maybe you don't have to write a whole blog. Maybe you just want to write this one slice of story and share it with the world. And it was my way of capturing kind of this diversity of experiences that people have, and just share it. And yeah, a lot of people responded. I got one comment today on a really old post about someone who transitioned in the equestrian community. And someone commented, thank you for posting this. But it's also like a way you learn, and it's a way to have a real conversation and kind of respond to people.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome reading everything that people responded. And like you said, you never know when somebody's going to respond to something you wrote a while ago, because that's the phase of their journey that they're at right now.
Yeah, so I'm really embarrassed by all my old content. Don't go read it. But once in a while, I'll get a comment like, "Oh wow, this post is really incredible," and I'm like, I'm still impressed that people connect with it, because you'd think 10 years later this would be much more visible, and kind of like I always say, my job was to put myself out of a job in trans advocacy, but yeah, it's still needed, and I think it's very appreciated that I think my favorite comments are the ones where just people say, thank you, or this really spoke to me, because I need to hear that too, right? Everybody needs to know. And that one person also speaks to other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I see we're getting a lot of great audience questions, and I want to get to them next. I just wanted to ask you one more question before we turn to those, which was, it's kind of more generally, what really surprised or struck you from the stories that you collected in the book?
I think how diverse they were, and different, and not just in the way that people talked about their gender and their gender expression and all that, but just kind of how they talked about their life and how they tried to find metaphors. Their life experiences, very different. And even kind of the styles that they wrote it, like we got poetry, we got very lyrical kind of pieces, narratives, we got very straightforward pieces, like this is what my journey, we got some academic pieces, these are statistics. And so one thing that I learned through this is that, yes, it's about gender, but it's also kind of just about communication and being a person. And everybody's different in kind of their own little weird, unique way. And that's okay. And I think we have to learn to appreciate a lot of that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right, let me turn to some of the audience questions. And let's start with one from William. William says, hello, personality has numerous perspectives and gender is certainly one of them. How do you differentiate whether an expression of personality is rated to gender or not?
So I hope I understand the question, but it's kind of how does how do you know if it's your personality or your gender? I think is what you're asking.
Yeah, I think it came up while we were talking about the different aspects of gender and the Genderqueer Backpack.
Yeah. So I've always said part of my gender is my personality. Like I'm like very straightforward person. I'm neat, and so like the way I have my hair and just kind of wear like plain t-shirts, and that's my personality. But it's also how I express my gender. And so a lot of times, like, you have people who are kind of straightforward and brusque and to the point is very like masculine attributes, right? And people who are kind of like soft and kind and nurturing is very feminine. And I think we have to get rid of those associations because usually they harm us more than they constrain us a lot of the time. And so you have to kind of say, this is my personality and this is my gender. And sometimes they match what society says. Sometimes they don't. And that's okay, right?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, going back to the Genderqueer Backpack analogy, just to take that a little further, Melissa mentions certain, like you said, those gendered kind of personality traits, and says, here are some things I'm taking from male and some things I'm taking from female. So it almost seems like the gendered personality traits persists in a way, like that's being carried forward.
Yeah, gender is very entrenched. And so, but I think the way that Melissa plays with their backpack is like, I took this high heel and it makes me feel tough because it's, it's a pointy shoe and I can kind of like just, it's, bright red and I can show myself. And so it's also playing with those attributes, right? Like I can be like soft and masculine and sensitive. And I think Melissa does a great job of kind of putting stuff in their backpack and taking stuff out, but also just mixing and matching and not sticking with what they were taught.
Okay, let's get to another audience question. This one coming up soon. This one from Austin. Austin asks, as non-binary genders become increasingly visible, where do you see healthcare going in terms of recognition, acceptance, and standards of care?
Ooh, well, we're going in a good direction, but there's still a lot of work to do. So even just for trans people in general, there's a lot of work in terms of acceptance and healthcare. Standards of care are a very interesting thing as well. So I'll give 2 examples. So when you go to the doctor, they usually, maybe they don't ask you your gender, but they definitely assume it. And there's definitely a box that they check. And so, for instance, they go and they see you and they check male. But what if you have ovaries and you're having an emergency and you have something in your ovaries that needs to be taken care of? How does the doctor know that? So one of the changes that some colleagues of mine who are doctors have been involved in is changing the electronic medical record systems. The big one is Epic, I think, is the one people use, and how doctors and healthcare providers mark your gender. Because, it doesn't matter what's in my pants unless something is wrong with it and you're my doctor and you need to kind of fix it. So there's a thing called the the organ inventory. And so what they do is the doctor, instead of assuming you're male and therefore you have these organs and your body looks like this, is, okay, what's your gender identity? Perfect. And what organs do you have? Because also some people who look male and were assigned male may not have all the organs, and some of them don't even know it until later. So this is a good way of kind of changing these, technological, physical systems, social systems that embody gender and constrain us, and also make it hard for people to seek care. The other thing, obviously, is insurance is big in the United States. And I think right now, there isn't really room for non-binary gender. The standards of care are still very binary in the sense that you have to, if you want to get hormones, you have to identify as male and present as male for X number of years and blah, blah, blah. And so it's very constraining, and a lot of people it's not only like upsetting because you have to lie, but it kind of perpetuates this myth. And it doesn't, even healthcare providers are miseducated. And so a lot of what I do is educate healthcare providers about this. Mm-hmm. I don't know, there's a lot about recognition in healthcare that I think is the movement has started for sure. Mm-hmm. But there's still a lot to go.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask a question that related to that, which is, there have been ongoing efforts at Google to make available more gender neutral restrooms and locker rooms, and to enhance transgender healthcare coverage. And I wanted to ask you, what else do you think we can do to create a more inclusive environment at work when we return to work for our non-binary and transgender colleagues, whether it's at Google or any workplace?
Yeah, I mean, Google has, I think, been at the forefront in terms of the healthcare coverage, for sure, covering trans-related healthcare. But sometimes we forget, gender is in physical structures, like you mentioned, restrooms and locker rooms. But you can have all these inclusive policies, but at the end of the day, you're interacting with people who are your coworkers, and they may or may not be educated on this and be accepting. Hopefully they are, but let's say they are accepting, but they don't know better. So a big part of it is just educate people who come in, and then people who leave and go to other places and pass that on. And even online, like, have your pronouns. A lot of people have talked about when they're in a call and they can put their pronouns next to their name. And so how do you communicate that in person? I know the Transit Google group has done a lot, and there's also more to do. And I think, I don't have the answer. I think just being open and getting involved and educating people every opportunity you have, one thing I always say is it's not only when you're in the room, it's also when you're not. So if, Mike, you're talking about me to a colleague and you use the wrong pronouns for me, then that's an opportunity that you can to educate someone else about it and say, like, oh, I'm sorry, these are the pronouns. Or someone says, you mean this person? And you're like, no, that's not what they're called now. So being advocates for other people, because we can't do this by ourselves.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Absolutely. I think we have another audience question. So let's go to that one. This one from Plymouth. Thank you for being an inspiration. As someone who is actually older than you, I wonder how you feel about the generational aspects of non-binary gender.
Yeah, this comes up a lot. There's, again, this trope that non-binary gender is a fad, that it's new. And I can tell you it's not new. Just because I didn't know about it and see myself doesn't mean there weren't people who came before me who were visible and have done a lot of work on it. And so I think one is to dispel this myth that it's about young people and that it's a fad and that it's something new, because it's not. And in the book, there's people of all ages who talk about their story. I think what's different is that most young people have a lot of room to explore their gender today, and they have the internet, so they've been more visible about it, and that's a positive. And I think we should embrace that, and that'll make it more inclusive for everyone. But I think we just have to remember that people grew up in different times with different kind of ideas about gender. And so some people may be more open to accepting the idea that it's not just male and female, that people have genders that are outside of that. And some people may embrace it right away because that's kind of how they grew up. Like, yeah, of course, this is completely ordinary. And the others just recognize that, yeah, it's not just about young people. It's happening to everyone, everywhere, all ages, and they're all trying to kind of find themselves. And I think that, again, gets lost in the representation of who's represented is mostly younger people.
Mm-hmm. I know you had a bunch of comments from the community on how quarantine has impacted gender identity and expression, and I was hoping you could share that.
Yeah, sure. So I asked on my social media, well, some people were like, why would quarantine impact my gender? Which is a fair question. On the other hand, a lot of people kind of have found comfort in having the space to, I think, slow down and explore themselves and this aspect of their life. And again, this applies to gender, but also everything else. They've become more comfortable exploring kind of this expression, like I can experiment and no one's necessarily seeing me all the time. So I can try on different outfits, different ways of doing my hair, different voices, and see what works. I like this one. No one here is misgendering me, and I'm not visibly trans in this in-between phase, which can be very scary for everyone. The flip side is also, again, sometimes they put their pronouns on their screen names, and this is good in that it forces people to see the pronouns. And if you normalize it in terms of, I was at this conference and they told all of the presenters to change their screen name to put their pronouns, which felt very inclusive because, again, it's about not just the singling out this non-binary person, but making it kind of everybody has different pronouns. But this person said it's harder to ignore it when people misgender you and your pronoun is like right there. So yeah, there's been a big response. I think the other one is just using this as a cocoon phase before I reemerge as my best self, which I really liked. Because again, it's a journey to figure things out, and sometimes it takes your whole life, and it'll change back and forth.
Mm-hmm. I like the comment too about the availability of gender-neutral bathrooms.
Yeah. And we don't think about that, but in your house, they're all gender neutral. So why are they any different at work?
Yep, exactly. This is great. I think we had one other great question from the audience that I think will help us wrap up this discussion. And so why don't we close up the slides and we can put that one up. All right, this one is from Ezra. So question for Micah. What do you think it will look like when non-binary identities are commonly known about and expected in society?
I hope that day comes soon. I think we're there for a lot of people who get to experience kind of authenticity in their gender and themselves in their everyday life. Or I think at least some of us get to experience this in some kind of portions of our life. I think what it'll look like is it'll be a known concept. So again, I didn't even know this existed. And so if I hadn't found it, I would have just kept wondering, like, I don't fit this definition of like, transgender who goes from one to the other when that's not the case. But there's something else that's not right about me. Like I have this feeling that I don't feel comfortable in myself and I want to do something. So I think having it out there and more available as a concept will help people kind of find it faster and explore gender. It'll also help other people explore gender, people who are not necessarily transgender, and kind of get rid of these constructs that limit us. It'll be a lot less work, I think, for non-binary people. Like I don't have to educate everyone about pronouns, fight with my, uncles about it or whatever the case is. because I think people forget how gender is everywhere. Like, again, just going to the bathroom at the office can be an incredibly frightening experience. And how many times do you do that a day, every day? And so it just takes a big weight off. What I think it won't do is kind of be a magic pill and solve everything. Because again, gender is so kind of complicated in a good way that you're always exploring, and there's always more to learn about it, about yourself, about other people's gender. And so I think it'll just give us this room to really explore that and play with it and figure it out in a way that's safe for people, because a lot of people, again, don't always feel safe doing it, in a way that's accepted and maybe even celebrated. Mm-hmm. Let's hope it one day it'll be celebrated.
Absolutely. Let's hope that day comes as soon as possible. And hopefully us talking here today and sharing with people has helped raise visibility and awareness so that day comes maybe a day sooner.
Yeah, I guess I don't see everyone here, but thank you for showing up. And when this is available, for sharing it with other people. I think that's the first step you can do, is just make it known that this exists and that it's okay.
Absolutely. Well, Micah, I just want to thank you so much for speaking with us today, Talks at Google. And I want to encourage everyone out there to pick up your book, Nonbinary, Memoirs of Gender and Identity, from Columbia University Press. You can visit their website, genderqueer.me, follow them on Twitter. Micah, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike. And if anyone else wants to reach out after, I'm online and you can find me easily. Just a quick Google search away.
Just a comment away. All right. Take care.
Thank you.